Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives podcast. I'm Heidi Kuda, and today High Fidelity and I are interviewing Sergei Cristo. He is the star of the award-winning podcast, Sergei and the Westminster Spy Ring. He's a whistleblower. He also is responsible for exposing the amount of Russian influence in UK politics. This is part 2 of the interview we started with him a few weeks ago. And the news that is breaking right now about Nathan Gill, a former leader of Reform UK, could just be the straw that actually breaks Nigel Farage's momentum. Let's hear from Sergei. Sergei Cristo and High Fidelity, super happy to be back with both of you today. Many of you already saw our first interview with Sergei, and we promised that we'd get him back as soon as we could to finish the conversation. And it's really important that we're doing this today because I'm very heartened by the work of independent investigative reporters like the Byline Times crew and Peter Jukes' crew and Carole Cadwalladr and her crew at The Nerve, because they are not letting, I think, the biggest scandal right now in the UK off the front pages. And that's, of course, Nathan Gill and the Russian-linked bribery charges. He, for those who don't know, was the former leader of Reform UK in Wales, a close associate of Nigel Farage's. They worked on Brexit together, and there's a number of additional stories breaking right now in Europe that actually indicate that there may be a sea change. And Sergei, why don't you tell us how you see this? You know, clearly this is your area of expertise, and we'd love to get your take on this.
Thank you so much again for having me. It's great to be able to talk to the US audience again. And yes, you're absolutely right. And the reason why I'm interested in this topic is that about 15 years ago, I inadvertently became a witness to Russian government's attempts to interfere in British politics. There was, as I told you in our first podcast, I was approached by a senior Russian diplomat in London who suggested that he had Russian companies or knew of Russian companies that wanted to contribute to the Conservative Party. And that was basically in the run-up to Brexit. Then there was a launch of a group called Conservative Friends of Russia, which this diplomat personally basically engineered, and he invited a group of high-ranking young conservatives, well, most promising young conservatives, including the future director of the Leave Europe campaign, the Conservative Party's official campaign to leave the European Union. They went to Russia on an all-expenses-paid 2-week trip to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, met lots of officials, etc. There was also apparently an attempt to discredit, how can I say, to basically they were invited to a strip club. And we don't know which one of them maybe went, a step further. And perhaps, the Russians have, some material on them. But to get back, so this story, I think at the end of my talk, I will let you know. Maybe we can talk, because in the first podcast we talked about kind of the beginning of the story, and I didn't tell you what happened after the publication of the Russia report in 2020. So basically, when I tried to expose this Russian diplomat at the time, the security service MI5 in the UK basically said they were not interested. And I left it at that because they told me to stay off this diplomat and so on. But then the report was published, called the Russia Report, by the Security Intelligence Committee of Parliament in July 2020, which basically its main concern was that in the conclusions of this report was that the intelligence security agencies of the UK refused to investigate Russian interference in British politics, actively avoided looking at any evidence. And I thought that this was exactly what I experienced myself with this diplomat. So I think what we will do is that maybe we can talk a little bit about what's happening on the Russian interference front at the moment, because I believe we're seeing an extremely important moment in British politics, where I believe the public opinion turned on foreign interference, because for years the Conservatives and Boris Johnson personally managed to create an impression that the Russian interference in British politics around Brexit did not have any impact, material impact. But I think now the more information, it's like with the conspiracy, it will always, the truth will get out, because something will leak, something will happen. And however well you conceal the conspiracy, it will, in the end, it will get out at some form or other. So the way this is getting out is that we, the foreign interference, how effective it is in the UK. We have this case, which you mentioned, about Nathan Gill, who was a leader of Reform UK Party, which is Nigel Farage's nationalist party, far-right populist party in the UK. Nathan Gill was also before a member of European Parliament. And what happened was that he was charged by the Crown Prosecution Service, and then the case was heard at the Central Criminal Court at Old Bailey in London, and he actually admitted that his guilt, and he was charged for bribery, accepting bribes from a Russian Kremlin-connected politician called Oleg Voloshin. So Oleg Voloshin calls himself Ukrainian, but he is a leader he's basically a pro-Russian politician in Ukraine, a party called, Oleg Voloshin is, so he accepted bribes for political statements in the European Parliament on television, and also for appearing at an event with a pro-Russian politician, from Oleg Voloshin. Oleg Voloshin calls himself Ukrainian, but he's actually a pro-Russian politician, a leader of a pro-Russian party in Ukraine called Platform for Life. And he's also linked to Viktor Medvedchuk. Viktor Medvedchuk is a very close figure to Vladimir Putin. And he basically, just to give an example, Oleg Voloshin at some point, in the Ukrainian parliament and so on, he defended the television channels, which basically was Russian propaganda, which were linked to Viktor Medvedchuk. And this person, Oleg Voloshin, paid Nathan Gill at the time when he was member of the European Parliament. So there are two interesting things here, which I would like to highlight. One is that the fact that Nathan Gill's affair actually was prosecuted under bribery charges, using bribery charges, rather than unlawful political interference, because the money actually came from a foreign source, which is illegal, both in Britain and EU. They chose not to use the illegal political donation, foreign political donation, inadmissible political donations route, but they chose the bribery route, where you can actually prove intent. They had some WhatsApp messages or something, as evidence. And the second interesting point is that this case, this bribery, happened in the EU, not in the UK. So I'm just wondering, because we know that there are so many allegations of Russian government representatives and proxies, Russian proxies, channeling money into political parties, into UKIP, what UKIP is now called Reform UK. and the Conservative Party, as I said, and none of those cases were effectively investigated by the police. And basically, I think the fact that the police this time didn't go for only went for this case, which was happened outside the UK, and also the different types of charges, which were not related to, illegal foreign donations, is maybe because they're afraid of creating a precedent. So if they were, presumably if they were effective in prosecuting a case in the UK under foreign donation, illegal donation, say, then perhaps there would be calls to investigate, prosecute other cases as well. So,
oh my gosh, let me just interrupt for 1 second, because that is so important what you just said. In America, we call it a limited hangout, where you get a piece of a prosecution of a far larger scandal in a way to sort of appease people. I can think about FBI officer Charles McGonigal, who ends up doing 4 years after he's actually taken money from, Oleg Deripaska and other foreign autocratic nation state cutouts, while he's supposed to be in charge of, investigating Russia for the FBI in New York. And so that is like a small piece of a much greater scandal. So it sounds to me like that's kind of adjacent to what we are very familiar with in the US.
Well, that's good. So, because I was struggling to explain it, and obviously, of course, I'm not a specialist, but that's kind of my inkling and my instinctive take on this particular case, which has been in the news, and it created quite a lot of a dissonance in the media. Quite a lot of left-wing commentators were saying that called for the proper Russia report, as they call it. I.e., proper investigation into Russian interference. And it makes absolute sense, because if you think about it, when the next election comes, and there's a lot of concern that we will have lots of interference from people like Musk, maybe this time not from Russian actors, because many of them have been sanctioned and exposed, but those people who are, who talk the same language, who use the same narrative, use the same populist rule book to take and maintain power. I think that risk is really here for everyone in the UK, and unless voters understand the mechanism, how this interference happened around Brexit and the general election that followed when Boris Johnson got majority in Parliament, I think it's very difficult for anyone to expect that they'll be informed enough, as they should be in any proper democracy, to go and have an properly informed view, to cast a vote for a party that they want to vote for. I mean, people really should, not just parliamentarians, but ordinary voters should understand how foreign interference works. And unless, we have full disclosure from the government, I don't think we can say that voters will vote in the next election, being fully informed. And that is a right. I think we have to, under democracy, any voter has an expectation to be properly informed about, if there was any shenanigans with elections and undue influence, criminal influence on ordinary voters. They should know about it, because that would inform their vote.
Absolutely. And not to mention that where Russia's expertise always is in noodling the margins, did they or didn't they? And as our friend Dr. Charles Creel says, who made multiple films about this, attempted murderer is still a criminal. So whether or not, you can prove, conclusively that it affected the Brexit referendum, the fact that there was even any meddling should be something that is put in front of, the people. And when you look at the words that Gil says compared to other, people involved in that nationalist movement, they mirror each other. So I think there's a lot more to mine there, and I hope it does not fall from the front pages soon. And we are seeing, bureaucrats being arrested. We're seeing teenagers being arrested in Holland as Russian spies. So we're seeing more movement. It feels like too little, too late, but it is something. But High Fidelity, you jump in now.
I find the whole Nathan Gill thing fascinating because yesterday, Nigel Farage came out, "Oh, we're gonna shoot down Russian drones and Russian planes, and I'm anti-Russia and Putin's a bad guy." And I wonder if people realize he's just a liar. He's just covering his behind. But my question for you is, uh, last time we were together, you talked about a lawsuit you had going in the European Union. And could you give us any updates on what's going on with that case? What exactly you're trying to accomplish? What is the hopeful outcome?
Yes, well, that's another little. When I mentioned about the public opinion turning on foreign interference, this is one of the factors, but hasn't really publicly happened yet. So I can just remind you that a number of former members of parliament now, but they were members of parliament at the time, and lords of British Parliament, basically lodged a case before the European Court of Human Rights, alleging that by not properly investigating Russian interference in British politics, the British government breached fundamental rights of ordinary voters. The European Court at the time, the chamber consisting of, I think, 7 judges, ruled against this for various reasons. You can Google my article, which I wrote. You can see the detail of all that on Byline Times. So if you just put Sergei Cristo Byline, you will see that article on ECHR. But basically, the point I made was, apart from the obvious errors, so, for example, I mean, the British government stated that they investigated it properly, in fact, and they cited the Russia report as evidence. The Russia report actually says, if you read the report, that the British government did not investigate. So, and they didn't have the means, obviously the parliamentary committee doesn't have all the means and facilities to do that investigation. So when the European judges actually agreed to that submission by the government, they themselves, it looked like to me that they haven't themselves read the Russia report to which they were referring in their conclusions. But interestingly, what I found amazing is that apart from one judge, the panel of the 7 judges of the European Court consisted judges that represented countries, European countries, where Russian interference has been particularly effective, or where there was a tendency for the populist parties to gain increasing support, parties that had been supported in various ways by the Russian government. And it was also chaired by a Georgian judge. And Georgia, as you know, until quite recently, has become extremely pro-Russian. They introduced measures that, evidenced a rollback of civil liberties and human rights, most significant in a very long time in Georgia. And the process to join the European Union has been suspended because of that. So talking of courts and legal battles, there was another case in the media which kind of keeps, I think keeps public opinion firmly on the subject of foreign interference, which is that there are 2 people who have been charged of being Chinese spies, Christopher Berry and Christopher Cash. And the case collapsed. And basically, the case collapsed. Basically, what happened was that the police took it to Crown Prosecution Service, and the Crown Prosecution Service decided that the evidence presented to them was about 5% short of the degree it had to reach in order to
the bar they have to
the
reach,
bar they have to reach in order to assure a successful prosecution. So they didn't actually take it to the court, and they blamed the fact that China is still not categorized as a threat in British politics. Basically, interestingly, I realized that maybe I know a little bit more about this case than I first suspected when I saw it in the news. The thing is that Chris Cash was a parliamentary assistant to Tom Tugendhat, who was one of the contenders for party leadership, but also in the year when those offences, spying offences, were allegedly committed in 2023, Tom Tugendhat was a security minister under the Tory administration. And what happened was that one of his colleagues, ministerial colleagues, at my request in 2023, brought some of the more serious and some of the details still kind of confidential, but concerns. I brought concerns through his colleagues to him as security minister to do with Russian interference in the Russian diplomat Nalobin case. And he promised to get back, but never have. So this week, on Wednesday, there was a very stormy Prime Minister's questions, which were dominated by this case. And Tom Tugendhat subsequently stood up and said that, you know, his home's been broken into, his files were ransacked. He had an agent inserted into his office by the Chinese intelligence, and yet Labour seemed to play politics with this case, apparently. What is interesting is that when I approached him during actually that period in 2023 about Russian interference and the role of the Russian intelligence, he didn't want to know about it. So I think there's fundamentally a case of, you know, pure political hypocrisy, and it's just two parties playing against each other when they should be really, you know, and everybody's saying this is national security, this is not political matter, you should be serious about it. But, you know, the words are uttered by a man who did exactly the same when he was minister in 2023. Absolutely despicable and horrible. I mean, I think the moral of all this is that if they don't stop playing politics, and both, you know, all parties realize, apart from reform, of course, that they need to be serious and confront foreign interference now with, you know, possibly further legislative changes, but more importantly, just rearrangement of national security agencies, how they function together on preventing foreign interference in time for the next election. I mean, we're heading for the fall. Farage will be in charge, and then anything to do with, you know, protecting our democracy will be stopped in its tracks.
Which is, like you said, which is where it appears to be headed. And that is so frustrating, because all they have to do is look at the United States and, you know, see that that is nothing that any democratic nation should want. And when you see Elon Musk paying for Tommy Five Name Robinson's legal costs, isn't that political interference? Isn't that something that they should, they have so many attack surfaces that need to be sealed off, in my opinion.
Well, that's what we can see on the surface, but actually support for people like Tony Robinson is, I think, more significant. And some of it is coming out. So I had a conversation with somebody this morning who said that actually people don't realize that when Musk retweeted a tweet by one of leaders of Reform UK, that retweet, because it went to hundreds of millions of people, generated £26,000 for this guy. And I don't think it was just one tweet that was retweeted by Tony Robinson, because Tony Robinson is actually his favorite politician. And if we can actually count how many times Musk retweeted Tony Robinson's tweets, I mean, you can imagine. So presumably he gets around the same figure, you know, every time. What, about £25,000? That's a source of income. And I'm sure Musk knows perfectly well about it.
Wow, that's a really amazing point. What else do you need our audience to know about? We are in many countries watch us, but again, you have a primarily American audience. What else would you like them to know about that you are working on currently?
Well, I was actually asked to write a policy paper on foreign interference for a parliamentary group. They're called APPGs, All Parliamentary Party Group, on fair elections. And that paper basically aims to identify loose ends, in terms of legislation and agency setup, on how we can effectively prevent foreign interference before the next election. There is some evidence that the government is starting to take this seriously. In the last couple of weeks, MI5, importantly, published guidance on foreign interference. And being a government agency, this is the first time since Brexit that the government officially recognized political finance as a form of foreign interference, and presumably that is based on past experience. And I think, MI5 should be pressed further to just confirm that the reason why they included it in the guidance is that they have encountered it in the past. And so the report, still has some way to go, but I think some things are evident. The key point that probably I would like to make now is that government capacity is not a problem. I think the government has all the tools it needs to, for example, investigate political finance, vet questionable political funding, donations. I think, if you think about it, terrorist finance is something that, intelligence security agencies have been dealing with for a long time. And I recently had a chat with somebody from anti-terrorist policing, and she basically said, the capacity is there. I mean, if the police wants to look at a money trail through banking, it will take them a bit longer. They have to get all the permissions. But if it's urgent, they can ask MI5, and MI5 can check it up on the same day. So, capacity is there, which means that the government does not need to release huge funding. It won't cost a lot of money to put the system together. It's just how you arrange it. And I think also the majority of legislation is also there. So, for example, the question, I think the only problem for the government, perhaps, to if they're asked to investigate and reveal the details of Russian interference around Brexit, is that they can't use legislation retrospectively to prosecute. So perhaps it's my guess, and it's an informed guess, that perhaps the government, one of the reasons why the government has been reluctant to release all the details is that it won't be able to prosecute the people who committed those offenses or alleged offenses, because at the time, political interference and who you actually call an agent of a foreign state, the definitions were different from what they are today. Historically, there's an amusing incident, how can I say, an example of that in the past from espionage. A friend of mine reminded me of this yesterday. The guy Burgess, who ran to Moscow, was one of the Cambridge Five spies, the famous Magnificent Five. He actually wanted to come back to England at some point. And there are historical records, archives that have been released to show that MI5 did not want him back, precisely because they couldn't prosecute him. There wasn't enough evidence according to that legislation. So I think, we're in a territory when foreign interference in Britain is back on the agenda. It's back on the news, and there will be more news, in this area, maybe next week, the week after. And as they say, strike it while it's hot. I think, we shouldn't lose this opportunity before any easily corruptible elements, which are always, prevalent in any democratic country, manage to, to put a stop on that. Because there are always people in any country that want to earn extra cash, be they government or political parties. And when they have seen that, they enjoyed the parties, they enjoyed the hospitality, even if they didn't take the money around Brexit from the Russians. And I'm sure, maybe not them, but the other generation, people who, grow up now, political elite, they saw that their predecessors got away with it, and they're very much looking for the next round of hospitality and expenses paid trips. So, there's always people who are ready to accept it, particularly when the economic situation is so dire.
I do love the idea of striking while the iron's hot. My last question for you is simply that, do you think this Nathan Gill story will have enough legs and enough front page cachet to actually break Farage's momentum?
Well, it's certainly a factor. But I think what people should remember, this is not an odd one out. I mean, Farage is now basically trying to say that, make an impression that Gill betrayed his confidence. But we shouldn't forget Farage's own secret trip to Russia when he flew on a private jet. He met Lavrov and possibly even Putin. And of course, the donation from Aaron Banks, which we still don't know many details about. Because I think maybe the Tory government was also afraid of opening that can of worms, because it would have created a impression that they were witch hunting, maybe another reason. But I think we're such a critical situation now. I mean, if you look at the map, we have the United States, which the democratic West cannot no longer really rely on.
Sergei, it is always so fascinating hearing your stories and speaking with you, and I'm very looking forward to your report and seeing what else you have coming up in the future. And we do hope you come back on our show. And High Fidelity, anything we forgot to ask or something else on your mind?
I'm just wondering, given all the countries that we have seen Russian interference, that we have seen Chinese interference, do you think America will wake up to the fact that, yes, our political process has been corrupted and our democracy it has not failed, but it is in the process of failing? I mean, do you see the same thing in the UK? Are people finally starting to get it, or no?
I'm an optimist, I have to be. And I think America has shown in the past so many times this incredible ability to bounce back, whether economically or politically. And there were very dark moments, as you know, there was Nixon, there were other things. And there was a period before the Second World War when the Americans were very reluctant to get involved, partly because business was also pushing against it. They didn't want to compromise their trade with Europe. So I am very hopeful, but I think partly we have to blame the powers that be. I mean, in the British case, I didn't really talk about it as I promised, but maybe now is a good time just to tell people that, after the Russia report came out, I tried to get this Nalobin case reopened again. And I went to the police. The police footballed me to IPT, which is the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, who then basically concluded that I was out of time, despite actually having discretion to ignore that particular factor. And, said to me that, they refused to investigate this case with Nalobin and Russian political interference because they don't have to. And I had no recourse. So I couldn't appeal against it or anything. So that ended that particular avenue. But they could have done, they could have opened it. And we live in a democratic country. But I think that also shows that we need in the UK more effective intelligence oversight. We need a parliamentary committee on intelligence security with more teeth. And I think the Senate's intelligence committee is a good example. We can really look, the kind of committee that can publish work without asking Prime Minister or executive for permission. And we know how heroic some of those, this famous torture report, for example, that the Senate's committee produced. So there is a lot of work to be done to strengthen our democracy. There are very practical steps that we can take, we can push for. So I think the main thing for people to think about, not just complain and, write comments online, but think practically how they can do it. Write to your MP, to your senator, to your congressman, with practical things. To strengthen intelligence oversight, to change some of the legislation around foreign interference and how easily people can be brought to book, and also maybe sometimes go out and demonstrate as well.
The failures of the
Perfect.
powers that be. That
Yeah.
is such a poignant line. Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
that
much
is
indeed for this
brilliant.
opportunity to speak to you.
Only if you come back, Sergei. That's the only way we're going to let you go is if you promise to come back when you have more
Of course,
breaking
anytime.
news. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. High five.